Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Lisa Rangel with Chameleon Resumes. You are here today for the Executive Career Chat session, and I'm so happy that you're here with us today. Today, our guest is Mark C. Crowley, author of Lead from the Heart, Power of Employee Wellbeing, um, other editions. And I'm super excited that we are going to have a conversation today to help you gain an edge in your executive interviewing. I also want to introduce you all to Kristen McDonald. You'll see her here on the screen. She's with our team here at Chameleon. She's running everything behind the scenes. If you have any questions, any problems getting in, have a colleague having a problem getting in, feel free to either message Krista or you can email her at krista@chameleonresumes.com. And then we will jump right in here. So Mark, I'm so thrilled that you are here with us today. Thank you so much for saying yes and being here to share your wisdom.
I'm so excited to be here. We were having a little conversation before, and I was just thinking outside of myself that this is going to be wonderful. So you're wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to just, I think a lot of people here and looking at the list, our fans know who you are, but I'm going to just read your little bio and then I'm going to ask you to just tell us a little bit about you and your work. Um, as I showed you, I have your book from early on with your little
There's a little
signature
more.
in it, so I've been a fan for a long time. Um, the I love the corporate work that you're doing. You're a speaker, consultant, author of Lead from the Heart, transformational leadership for the 21st century and the power of employee well-being, moving beyond engagement to build flourishing teams. I think those are timeless topics, even though the well-being book is from last year and your Lead from the Heart book was from 2011. But when I was rereading it in preparation for this session, I mean, I just felt like all the correlations you were making from the fallout of 2008 and 9 and talking about it in 2011, I swear all that's happening now. It's just timeless and relevant, and I'm so glad we're doing this. So, Mark is a regular columnist for Fast Company magazine, Psychology Today, and his work has been published in USA Today, Reuters, Forbes, Stanford Local, a Social Innovation Review, say that 5 times, and many, many other places. And we met because we are Cornellians, and I think Matt Palumbo originally put us in touch like a long time
Yes,
ago.
he
So
did. Hmm.
so yeah, so I'm super thrilled. Go Big Red. So yeah, let's talk. The work you're doing, like how have you seen it evolve? Like you said when we were chatting earlier, that you're blessed in that although you maybe didn't intend for it to be timeless, it's timeless and it's evergreen and it's applicable to what's happening today. What does that mean for you? Like, and how do you feel that that's relevant to the audience that
Well,
watches your work?
when I wrote the book in 2015, I was coming out of I'd spent 25 years in corporations and senior level roles, and so nobody knew who I was. And I had a speaking agent, and she said, you're going to need to build a platform. You're going to need to build, and social media was just sort of taking off, particularly, Twitter, even LinkedIn was just sort of happening at the time. And so she goes, do you have any idea how to do this? And I said, no, I'll figure it out. But she goes, no, you need some help. And so she said, I need you to spend $10,000 and work with this person because she's very good at social media and helping you build the platform. And I thought, okay, so this is an area of expertise I don't have. I'll trust her. So I spent the money. Long story short, she comes back to me and she says, I don't have a social media plan for you at all. We're not going to talk about your platform. We're going to talk about your whole thesis. And she said, look, if I have plan A and plan B. And plan A is what I want you to do. And plan B is what you're going to want to do. And plan E is stupid. Plan B is stupid. Plan A is what you need to go with. She's doing this back and forth. And I go, just tell me what it is you want to tell
Tell
me.
me what to do.
And so I'm going to clean this up, but the audience will know that this is what she literally said to me. She goes, you're going to effing fail if you ever use the expression lead from the heart again. And what she was telling me was that the world is not ready for this. We think that the heart is soft and weak and sentimental. We don't bring it in. People don't work for you when you care about them. And then I had dinner with a gentleman named Spencer Johnson, and many of you will know that Ken Blanchard and he wrote
Yeah.
Cornelian,
Yeah.
that they wrote The 1 Minute Manager, but Spencer independently wrote Who Moved My Cheese, which is one of the most successful business books of all time. And I had dinner with him like soon after this conversation. By the way, I asked her, "Did you cash the check? Like this is what I get my 10 grand for? You're telling me I'm going to fail?" And so Spencer Johnson said, "Give me like the quickest summary of what you're talking about." And so I told him the thesis, and he goes, "Look, he goes, you're going to struggle with this because the world's not ready for this."
Right.
So, but you're speaking truth, and truth always prevails. So if you want to keep going, you don't have to quit. You just have to prevail. Now, if somebody told me it was going to take all this time for people to go, what he's saying makes all the sense in the world, I probably would never have quit, never have kept going because it
Yeah.
was like, you know, but I'm grateful now that obviously I chose the road less traveled here and held to my guns because I knew it was truth. I just couldn't have imagined it would take so long, but we'll talk about why it happened finally now in a minute, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
No, I agree. I mean, what were some of the, myths or resistance, aspects that you encountered when you first tried to convey this message? Which
Well,
I think imagine still happen a bit today, even though people are more
yes,
educated on the
yeah.
topic. But what are some of the common misconceptions or
It
myths that you encounter?
starts with the whole premise that we're not responsible for caring about people. This is a transactional relationship. I'm going to
Hmm.
pay you to do a job. I'll pay you a little more if you do well. I may give you more opportunity if you do well, but if you don't do well, there's somebody sitting outside ready to take your chair. This is
Right.
traditional leadership theory. So we've just been passing this on for from decades to decades. But then you add in the word heart. And what this woman was trying to tell me was that's the one. Remember the game Operation where you
Yeah.
had yeah, right. It's like don't use the word heart. But we can talk about the heart issue in a second. Why I went with that and included it into the title because there's science behind it. But I was offered an opportunity to speak at Amazon, and the gentleman that wanted me in, he goes, "Man, do we need you? This is like the message for our organization." And so obviously I'm very excited. Jeff Bezos was still there. He was going to be in the audience. And then like 48 hours before they canceled me. And the guy goes, "Oh, we changed our mind. We're not going to have any speakers. We're just going to be, just ourselves. And so really sorry." And so during COVID, somebody called me and said, "We'd like for you to speak at Microsoft on a virtual event and could we schedule a meeting?" So there were two people in the call. And the person running the call, finally he goes, "Have you like do people like think you're stupid? Like do they think you're absolutely insane with this message?" And I go, "Yeah." So I start to tell him, I go, "Look, I got canceled at Amazon. I'm almost certain it's because somebody saw the title of the book and went, no way, no how."
Right. We're
And
all
the
about
other guy
efficiencies
on
and
the
numbers.
call he goes, "I was that guy. I
No.
was the guy who was trying to hire you." And he goes, "That's exactly what happened." My boss goes,
Oh my
"We're not
God.
we're not listening to this shit if he can't drive any performance." That's what he said to me. And I'm like, okay, so I got confirmation. So
Oh my
we've just,
God.
it's just this idea that it's just easier to have an impersonal relationship with people and not really be concerned with who they are as a person. And
Right.
it conflicts with what we all want from work. We want to be known, we want to be seen, we want to be appreciated and grow and to have a sense of safety and a sense of belonging and connection with the people that we work with. And so the gap is that people go to work and they're like, "I'm not getting any of the things that I need in exchange for my work and my life's time here."
Right.
And leaders are just saying, "Well, we don't really need to do that." Now, what's happening is that enough people have quit their jobs in response to leaders who don't care about them that
Hmm.
companies are saying, "You're going to have to do something to lower your turnover here because this is unsustainable."
Right. That's
So,
not a good business metric when you have high
finally, that's
turnover.
what's
It comes down to
happening.
the numbers. Right. It just comes down to the
Exactly.
numbers. Which, I love your work because I just firmly believe, and we've talked about this, like, even if you don't buy into this stuff, right? Like, even if you're not this empathetic, heart-centered, whatever kind of word you want, leader focused on well-being, you can't ignore the numbers and the research that show that if you take care of people, it's simply good business to take care of people, right? So like even if you are a numbers hawk, this is still the best way, in my opinion, right? So you have to fake it or you have to genuinely do it because it's just the best way. But
You can, well, here's the thing. So the reason the book is called Lead from the Heart was that it was interesting because I was having a conversation. I'd been sort of putting the book together, the first book,
hmm
Lead from the Heart, and had these piles, and it was, these are going to be the chapters, and I'm just ready to wet my pencil and start writing. And a friend of mine called me up and he goes, "You're going to have to explain why this works. Like you just can't go out there and say you need to lead this way." And so I needed to think about what it was that I was doing that was influencing people so consistently over such a
hmm
long period of time. And I started off as a management trainee and then worked up to two national level positions in one of the largest financial institutions in the country. And
Right.
so at every level, people responded to me this way. And it hit me one day. I think I was affecting the hearts in people. And it
Yeah.
was this wonderful, profound thing for about 30 seconds. And then I was like, the people I used to work with, they're going to hear a leap from the heart and they're going to go, "What happened to him? He left the company and went to write a book that did he become a Hari Krishna? Like is he, did he have a mental breakdown? Because we don't bring
Right.
heart into leadership." So my wife think gratefully said, "Well, you already know it's true, so why don't you go see if you can find some evidence?" So I've been spending all these years since just looking for more and more credible support for all this, and there's been this printing press basically of massive, compelling, remarkable research that shows that there's a science between this that principally boils down to two things. One is that human beings are not rational. We
Right.
think we are, and the most rational people who are think they are will come up to me and they go, "I hear this, but you should see my Excel sheets. I'm like the most detailed, organized guy." What they don't understand is it's all going on under the hood. So we're not rational, and not only aren't we rational, but that feelings and emotions are driving human behavior. And so once we understand that, then it changes our whole mentality. How people feel is much more important than what they think. And so we
hmm
like, "What do you think about this?" It's not, or, "What are you thinking about right now?" It's not what they're thinking about. It's what are you feeling right now? Because at the end of the day, feelings is what influences people's decisions on
hmm
not just well-being, but also engagement. But here's the thing. There's science that shows that the heart and the mind are connected, and the body is connected to the mind through the
hmm
vagus nerve, and that the heart is actually sending more signals to the brain than the other way around. So, what does that mean? It means you and I are having this conversation right now. You're having a feeling. So, one of two things, and be simple here. One of two things are happening. The first one is you're having a feeling that, "Oh, I regret bringing this guy on." And then your mind goes, "Oh, we're having a technical difficulty and we've got to end this thing." Or or you have a feeling of, "I'm so glad that I brought him and this is going to be a wonderful thing." But
Yeah.
the feeling happens before the thought. So we should be much more conscious of, I call it emotional currency. We should be much more focused on how people are feeling, because when people are feeling positive and feeling supported and cared for and safe and all those things, appreciated, growing,
hmm
it's leading them biologically to commit themselves to a level of performance that you could never get any other way, including with the whips and the
Right.
micromanagement.
No, and I think we've set a really great stage in terms of the backdrop, behind the point of today, which is really how do we tie all this into executive interviewing and performing at a much higher level when you're competing with fellow A-level players. I think executive interviewing is different than when you're interviewing coming up the ranks or when you first started, because, most people on the call at the executive level, I'm going to suspect, have outworked everybody, and that's what served them, when they first started and when they were in the middle of their career. But now, if you are competing at a C level or an executive level, you are competing against everyone else who outworked you. So who outworked with you. And so that's not a differentiator anymore. And I think coming across as a leader that is concerned about well-being and concerned about individuals genuinely can be a differentiator, but how do you do that? And we talked about some ways and some tactics that people can employ um, during their interview process to help differentiate themselves. And I'd really like to, expand on some of those. what what would you say, but let's before we start with the tactics that work, what would you say have you seen when executives are interviewing that sabotages their candidacy when they are being asked about their their work with their people? What are some ways that they basically completely trash their candidacy without maybe even consciously realizing they're doing it?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to call out something that you said because it was like, oh, this is very powerful. Here's my observation. A level leaders already get this. It's the B and C level. If you hate, I hate those descriptions,
I
but
know, same here,
because,
but yeah.
because that's your vernacular. But the people that are going in for these top positions, I am finding, and it wasn't always true. They were the most resistant. But the ones who were coming into the final three candidates for these interviews, these are the people that already get this. But I think to answer your primary question, the biggest one is so tell us about your team and how well your team's doing right now. Well, I've been doing some things with my team, and I have had 30% increase, and I have had and like there's nothing that ends an interview faster than the word I. So so I would it's like it's such a deal killer. But I think the so going back to the combination here, the A level guys get this. They don't always articulate it because I think they're doing it instinctively. If they've learned
Yeah.
along the way that being more caring and supportive of their people and focus on their well-being is in their best interest. So it doesn't mean necessarily that when they get into the critical questions of how do you get performance that people are able to articulate it because they probably don't know, like they haven't like done the work to say what is it about me, why
Hmm.
would somebody perform for me. And so I think that the if the language that I would use if I was an executive going into an A level position, very high level organization in a final interview, and they said, well, tell us about how you lead. I would say, well, it started with a journey because I don't necessarily think that I always realized the importance of taking care of the people. I may have, made some mistakes along the way early in my
Hmm.
career, but over time, what I've come to understand is that the more that I can do to support the people in this win-win way, the more
Hmm.
that I can do to support them, to help them achieve their career goals, to help them achieve their needs, to make them feel safe and supported, deeply connected to the people that they work with, so much so
Hmm.
that, and I'll just insert here that belonging is the greatest driver of employee well-being there is. And
Right.
so I'm saying double down on that, where you're saying, you don't work here. I'm not going to hire anybody onto this team who doesn't have an orientation of team and collaboration, cooperation. Like if you want to
Hmm.
be a lone wolf and be the star, that's not what we're about here. We're all going to help each other. We're all going to make each other feel safe. We're going to make each other
Hmm.
feel welcome. These kinds of things actually amplify performance in a really profound way. And so I
Right.
have found that there's this need for balance, and that when I'm supporting people, that I can actually raise the bar, that I can
Hmm.
actually elevate my expectations of their performance because they're being supported in ways that no other leader around is doing. If I'm in the interview room and if I'm one of the top executives
Hmm.
listening to somebody say that I didn't always do it, but this is what I've learned and this is my journey and this is what I've perfected, I'm
Hmm.
gonna go, God bless you, you got the job,
Right. Right.
because it's realistic. Most people, it's like you've always led this way. Oh yes, I've always been a caring person. I've always been supportive. There are those people out there, but I think for the most part, this has been an evolution in terms of our understanding. So be honest about it. That's another thing is when people aren't willing to, sort of be self-effacing and self-critical. So when
Hmm.
somebody says, well, I wasn't always very good at this. Like this wasn't something that I always thought it was about just getting performance at any cost. That's common knowledge. That's like that's a common belief system. So
Yeah.
if you're saying I'm willing to accept that, but I
Hmm.
also have made this transition because it's proved to be much more expensive or
Hmm.
effective, then you've won me twice. Like your humility and your honesty and your willingness to, to open the kimono a little bit. It's when
Right.
people go in and think that they have to go, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest,
Yeah, I
that
think
they lose.
perfection can really detract from the overall presentation, we have a couple of questions in the chat that I are great follow-ups to what you were just saying. A couple of people were saying that, especially as women, we feel like we're leading from the heart, but when we're telling a story about our team, we're often pressed, well, what did you actually do? What would be some great comebacks to that? And obviously this is a general stance. It's not a specific interview coaching moment, but what's your intuitive feeling when you're told about when you have a story of how you've led your team and then you're pressed on like, what did you actually do? What do you think is happening there?
I think it's the naive. Oh, well, that's all very good, but how did you get your numbers? Kind of a question. So
Right.
that's the world I'm hoping we're leaving, right? But it's still real, and if you're a woman, you automatically assume to be leading with more heart than men. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing I'll say is that study after study after study shows that women make better leaders than men. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something to be said about caring about your people and demonstrating empathy and having patience and allowing people to have some resilience and make some mistakes, all the kinds of things that I'm not just advocating for, but that give people the sense that I'm working for somebody who gets me, who understands me, who's willing to accept all my peccadillos, if you will. So
Mm-hmm.
if I were a woman and somebody said to me, well, what did you do? I would say, well, I want to make sure you understand that this is what I do. Like this is intentional. What I do
Agreed.
is what drives the performance. So that people misunderstand. They go, oh, well,
Creating
the
that
team's
climate, it's an actual,
yes.
that's the
I've
actual
created a
action.
culture of
Right.
performance.
Right.
I'm here to optimize performance, and this is the formula for it. So when you ask that question, I think you might be missing that this is who I am. Like this, I'm the embodiment of making sure that I'm supporting people in a way that would inspire them to reciprocate,
Mm-hmm.
that would motivate them to perform at a higher level than anybody else could get to.
Absolutely.
So I would double down on it is the point, you know.
That's the confidence piece, and that's the leadership piece, I believe. It's if you're asked, what did you do in it? There's two things I think are happening. One is what you just said. There's an opportunity to double down on it and show them that this is what true leadership is. And the other piece of it is you might be coming across too much as a doer who now isn't emulating strength as a leader, and they're questioning that. So then that's more of a doubling down as a candidate on improving their performance on how they share their story.
This goes back to the question you asked, what are the things that derail an interview? You know, the if you're not seen as somebody who delegates well and trusts people to perform at a very high level, like if you're going for a senior role, you're not doing most of the jobs. There's a whole bunch of people doing things you don't even know what they're doing,
Exactly.
how they're doing, right? So, but if I'll just say this, that the higher somebody ascends in their leadership career, the greater likelihood that they're masterful at developing people,
Hmm.
developing great relationships with those same people, and trusting them to deliver. Not to say that you're not holding them accountable and that you don't have methodologies to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, regular practices of checking in with people and seeing how things are doing. But to get to that level, most people want to be autonomous. And the last thing you want to do is to be working with someone who say, "I'll take that over. I'll do that. Oh,
Right.
that's a big one. I should do that." You've got to
Hmm.
be handing those things off to people. So I just don't think that most people that get to senior leadership roles are doers any longer.
No,
They're
they shouldn't be if they want to be effective,
better
for
not
sure.
be. Yeah.
Someone in the chat brought up, managing and being this kind of leader in environments that now seem more and more toxic, for various reasons, which could probably be another, executive career chat we'll do for another
Yeah.
day. But like, what advice do you have for standing true in the leadership style that you're doing that you advocate for in environments that might be toxic?
This was probably 20 years ago, but there's a very prominent leadership development company called Cohen Brown. And
Hmm.
Marty Cohen was a medical doctor. And he created this methodology that just about every bank in the country, literally in America,
Hmm.
bought and imposed on their people. And the premise was, I can make he as the teaching you this methodology of micromanagement. I can
Hmm.
make your people more productive than they would ever be on their own. And it was crushing. So initially, people were fearful, and so the performance spiked, and all of a sudden, you could go, look. The minute we put this system in place, people are like loving this,
Hmm.
and doing great work. And so the companies felt that they'd spent their money appropriately. But over time, so it worked like this. Mondays, the managers had to make a commitment of how many loans they were going to get and that kind of stuff. And then Wednesdays, it was how are you doing versus that? Are you on track? And then Friday was declare. And if you didn't get your numbers, whatever it was you were supposed to get, you were shamed in public. And you do this after week after week after week, and ultimately it just takes the spirit away from people. But it also
Hmm.
takes the idea that I can trust you. I hired you. You impressed me so much that I wanted you on my team, and then I'm going to revert to this kind of like
Hmm.
treating people. It doesn't make any sense, but I think that it comes down to a fear in the leader themselves that when you're behind the goal, you're not achieving what you need to, that somebody in LinkedIn used this word, that they toggle. So they're like, okay, I'm going to be caring, but the minute we're not hitting our numbers, I'm toggling to the micromanagement, the fear, and the intimidation. And like, that's not what I'm talking about. You
Right.
have to be, okay, we're not hitting our goals here, but I love these people. I hired these people. This is my team. This is the team that's going to deliver for me. So why would I want to start using the whip? Why don't we get them together and say, hey, we're like 40% a goal with like 2 weeks. Can we
Right.
turn this around? What can we do? How can we do our best to make this thing better? That's when the rubber hits the road. And this is when people either decide you really do care about me or it's all about you. Because
Right.
the minute you're not hitting goals, you got to go to your boss. And so the bow tie around this is don't wait for somebody to manage and lead you the way you believe people need to be led and managed.
Hmm.
Lead people the way you believe they should. In other words, embody this on your own. As long as you're getting
Exactly.
numbers, nobody's going to come to you and go, "Hey, Lisa, you're being too caring." It's like, I'm sorry, but we not hitting our results. Like, what is it what's the criticism
What's the
here? If
problem here?
somebody were to do that, and so I think this is the issue. And then you're building your reputation every single day. So I never had a problem attracting great talent because people knew if they came to work for me that I was going to care about them in ways that no one else would even think to. But I also help people grow in their careers. So if you wanted to get to the next level, working for me was the best thing because I was paying attention to it. Here's what you need to
Right.
do. This is where you are. You're going to get there. You're moving progressively. People could see the progress. They could feel the progress. It's like that's what people want to know that they're working for as an advocate. And
So
so,
I love that you bring that up because when we were doing some of the prep work for this session, you brought up, just people being able to talk about examples, right? So if, what, and our stance here is more from the being on an interview as an executive versus like being in the job, although, some people are working and can take this to use inside their workplace. But um, you talked about a scenario where, people, and you even alluded to it earlier, like people like, oh, I'm totally, an empathetic leader. I care about well-being, whatnot. And then when they come up with examples, when they're asked to come up with examples, that's sometimes where they fall short. And, if you can expand on that and what that screams to a leader, that you're
so
in trying to differentiate yourself.
there's a question that I've asked for many, many, many years, and you and I were talking a little bit about this before we went live. That I would bury in the interview, so it would come later in the discussion. And so let's just do a role play. I would say, "Hey, Lisa, I'm wondering, have you ever like intentionally helped somebody who worked for you grow to the next level? Like you had a
Hmm.
plan for them and you took them from where they were and helped shape them and coach them and develop them. Uh, do, do you have anybody like that? And of course, everybody's going to universally go, of course, I've been doing this my whole life and I've been helping everybody. And the next question is the one that stuns people because you go say, I'd like to know three people specifically. Tell me their names, what was their role, and what did you specifically do to help them? Not what they did, but what did you do? And it's like, well, and they had nothing to go after that. And the reason they
Hmm.
didn't was because they didn't do it. It was never intentional. So that's not to say that people didn't get promoted off of their team, but
Right.
they largely got promoted off their team because they were star people that were doing everything wonderfully, and other people recognized them and came and tapped them on the
Hmm.
shoulder and said, "You deserve more," or even they did. But it's the advocacy. It's the advocacy, and it's really interesting. We haven't gotten to this yet, but uh, the number one statistic that stands out for me, which actually influenced me to write this book, the new book, is that 84% of people today say their highest priority is their own well-being. And in a work setting, that means more than getting a promotion, more than getting a cool opportunity at work. It has nothing to
Hmm.
do with work. It's like while I'm at work, I want well-being, and if I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to stay. Now we're in a tough
Hmm.
market right now, so people are kind of like handcuffed and job whatever that what's the
Job
expression,
hugging and
job hugging,
job
whatever.
stucking, I think, is a lot
They're
of what
just
it is, not
they're
really
just
even
biding
hugging.
their time is the answer. Yes, they're biding their time. This isn't
Yeah.
working for me, but I'll stick around. But in the moment that they want to, if they're not getting their well-being, so it's interesting because when Lead from the Heart first came out, I thought that the science was so overwhelming and so mind-blowing, which it continues to be as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
that 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 CEOs would go, "Hey, look at this. We need to reorient how we lead because we now have a better understanding of human nature, and what we've been
Hmm.
doing is entirely misaligned. So let's align our leadership." And they didn't do it. And I was mystified for a really long time. I'm like, how could you ignore this? But the reason was twofold. None of them led that way. They clawed their way to the top of the ladder because they were kicking and stepping on other people's toe. I'm being facetious, but you get the
Yeah.
idea.
The way
Very
we've all been brought up
competitive.
to do it. Yeah.
And so what's happened here, the reason that we have hundreds of people listening to this, I suspect, is because we've gotten to the time where, and COVID had a huge influence over this, that we're all sort of looking at work and saying it can't just be a paycheck. It's got to be much more rewarding
Hmm.
on myriad levels. And so it's this bottom up that's forcing the change. I always
Right.
thought it would be top down, and it's not. It's all of us saying, this isn't working. We've got to do better. We've got to
Right.
help people. I want to be helped. I want to be supported. So we're sort of pushing up leadership in terms of the expectations because people are in leadership roles are like, what I was doing before isn't working
Right.
anymore.
That almost answered a question that you don't even know was being asked in the chat. A few people have asked in the chat, like, um, I'm not going to paraphrase. I'm going to read a couple of them. How do you build genuine collaboration in an organization whose culture is unintentionally suppressing or diminishing the contributions of its people? How do you handle a boss that leads from the head when you're leading from your heart, and they see you as being too soft? Like just those types of questions, like just how do you interview in an environment? How do you change the environment? And I'm interested in your answer. I have one in my head, but I think you can't. It's just you have to start with you on some level,
Well, I
right?
mean,
Like,
the thing is that people like themselves, right?
hmm.
So if you have a boss who's in their head and is analytical all the time, and I don't even want to use this language, but we can relate to it. There's nothing touchy feely about that person,
Yeah.
like Lou Grant in the Mary Tyler Moore
Right.
Show,
Right.
like that. You're going to have to meet that person that where they are if you're going to be
Yeah.
successful for them, right? So really, we're talking about managing your team this way and being the embodiment of it.
Hmm.
So the thing about, so we have this idea that if it's this fear that if the minute I start caring about people, that they're going to get soft around the middle and they're going to take advantage of me. That's the fear. So when people ask me this question of, well, how do you hold people accountable when you're supporting them? What they're trying to convey to you is, you can't, right? You know that you can't support people and have high expectations. And so what I'm saying is, actually, it's the other way around. So what happens is that when you're developing people and you have plans for them and you know them and you're making accommodations for them in any possible way, my kids doing poorly at school and I've got to go to the teacher. It's like, by all means, go to the, do those kinds of things. You've got an elderly parent. If leaving earlier in the day to get to that parent helps that person and they can still get their work done, people will never forget that. But I think what I want to make sure that I'm clear on here is that it's a balance of mind and heart. It's not all heart. So we have a head, we have a brain, and we have another form of intelligence right here. And what
Hmm.
most leaders do, they think I can only use this, and if I turn this on, it's probably going to get me into trouble. But I'll use it a little bit because I'm listening to this guy and he's telling me I need to do it. Right? And and I'm saying it needs to be this. It needs to be this sort of body,
Right.
embodiment. So with my teams, I I would set very high goals. I mean, relative to what everybody else was doing, I said, "Well, you guys are you're superstars. Like because of how much support you're getting and the environment that you're working in." But I want to come back to this cooperation thing, that we can set higher expectations as long as you're being rewarded for them.
Hmm.
Let's aim high. And I think holding people accountable is simply saying, let's meet every quarter and we're going to talk about your performance specifically. I'm saying
Right.
you should be working every week with your people, but from a performance standpoint, I don't have any problem saying, Lisa, I love you, and at the same time, you're not hitting what you need to achieve. Like you're underperforming, so I want to spend some time talking about that.
Right.
I don't have to, like, oh, I've been the heart guy now and now I can't have that conversation. Of course you can.
That's the maturity right there, which actually
It's
answered somebody else's question who said, "How do I do this when I'm trying to be, how do I
have the
reinforce
conversation.
that?" Yeah, you
Leaders
just and you
never
separate
is.
it. You separate
Leadership
it.
is about getting performance. So like that's your job. So
Exactly.
nobody's going to go, well, I thought you were the heart person, and now what's this? Asking me about where, like, that. People are like normal. They know that they're on the line for their jobs. So and the other thing is you can amplify recognition. So this was something that I did. I institutionalized it. So every month we would review our performance. And if I, like, one point I was managing 30 different managers, and if 28 of them hit the goal that was important, I would thank each of the 28. A lot of managers go, well, we don't have time for that. So let's just take the top
No.
three. And I'm like, top three? Then you got 25 people who are going to go, why did I work this hard for nothing? So
Yeah.
if people want to get that recognition, so if you establish this sort of ritual of recognizing authentically and thanking people and tell the story. How did you do it? You weren't even close to getting the goal, so that people
Hmm.
can learn. But here's the thing that I want to make sure that we talk about, which is this cooperation, collaboration thing. I just had Daniel Coyle on my podcast, and he wrote a book about 7 years ago, The Culture Code. And
Hmm.
what he did was basically confirm the whole lead from the heart thesis from a remarkably different point of view, which was he
Right.
went and looked at what's the common denominator of high performing teams. And this is long before anybody identified that belonging was the most important component
Hmm.
driver of employee well-being. What he found was that the most effective teams are ones where, and this is the important thing, everyone on the team has each other's back. And when you hear those words, I hope it, like, affects you. Like, I hope you get emotional about it, because the idea is that by belonging, you could be you, Lisa. I don't, like, I'm from New York originally, so we always had
New Jersey.
condescension towards New Jersey, right? I'm using it as a joke But
Most
right?
underrated state, by the
Yeah.
way. We're awesome.
So so it's like accepting people, but
Right,
more importantly for who they are. You hired them, so yeah, everybody's going to have limitations. Why don't you focus on what they're best at? But the
right.
bigger issue is hiring people onto the team who buy into that. So, in other words, if you want to be a star, if you want to be the star, if you want to take the winning shot 10 times out of 10 metaphorically, you're not going to be a fit here because the way that this is how I've managed my entire career. So this was just completely corroborating it
Hmm.
is that if people feel that they could go to Lisa for help because Lisa's looking out for everyone on the team versus feeling that they're competing with them, it changes the dynamic completely. So now people know that if they have to go to Lisa for something, that Lisa's willing to help them and that they're willing to help.
Hmm.
So, for example, in these recognition settings, when we had our monthly meetings, uh, somebody would do something remarkable and we would applaud it and congratulate it. But then I'd say, what did you do specifically? And some of the ideas were just like, holy cow, no one has ever thought to do this. And then there were 30 people on my team, and all 29 of them could then go and take that idea, which they did. So
Right.
now, and there became this joy of
It's like a
sharing.
ripple effect of joy. Yeah.
It's
It's
love. It's
awesome.
like it is. And so but we the former CEO of Microsoft set up a system where the bottom 10% were fired every year and people that weren't in the top 20% didn't get bonuses. So for 10 years at Microsoft, their stock went nowhere. And Steve Ballmer was basically, getting rid of people all the time, not realizing he's creating the most toxic culture where people are competing with each other, feeling each other
Exactly.
as a threat. It's the opposite of what I'm talking about. So
Right.
this is how you get cooperation. You demand it. This is the expectation. I'm going to evaluate your performance based on how much you give back, not on how much you
Hmm.
take.
You bring up a really good point, and there's a few questions that I've brought up, and like that are seem to be that there's like a frustration on how do if you're a heart person and you're working for a head person, or you're working in a toxic environment, like, that type of thing. And I just, if you haven't, and this is not a plug, but if you have not read the book, Mark's first book, you should. One of the more moving statements, one of the more moving stories was when you talked about your upbringing, and that you had a very hard upbringing, hard upbringing with a very tough dad. And there's, I think it was Ashmi's question that says, how do you uh, I've met leaders who are not people centric. In fact, they're the opposite, and they create a culture that's one of toxicity. They throw people under the bus, only public criticism. Many of them seem to have teams that are loyal to them. Is it just fear, or that they're attracting people that thrive in that? I mean, that's all of that, right? And in the end,
Yes.
I think in some way we're all damaged in some way, right? From our upbringings, from experiences we've had, some better than others, some, you know, uh, but I think it's there's people who've done healing, and there's people who've done education, and there's people who've done processing of their trauma, right? And use their powers for good. And then there's people who have not processed it, and they're doing the best they can, even if they're in a position of success. Even, toxic cultures make money sometimes, right? Like, it's not a long term. They might have other symptoms of the business that are not profitable in terms of turnover and wasted training hours and things like that. But like, I think this session and your book will not fix how to work with toxic people. It's about how do you stop leading with your head only and lead with both, and realize that the profitable way is to be authentically caring of people. Um, but I think we have to accept that it's never going to all go away, right?
No,
Like, it's
no.
just
And one of the reasons why somebody told me this years ago, and it was like, whoa, is that accurate? And it's the idea that most people are operating out of their childhood selves, and we don't
100%.
We don't realize it. And so it was really interesting. So you just brought this up. When I started writing The Power of Employee Well-Being, it just hit me that the very first place that, like, it's people want to go, what do I have to do? What do I like? What are the practices? Which is what the book is about. But the very first two are know thyself and know thy values.
Right. You got to do the
And
inside
like,
work.
and people, that's it. That's
It's
it.
not a
And
list of tasks to execute. It's like you got to
you've
do
got
the
to do
inside work
you.
first.
You
Yes.
can't lead other people if you don't know how to lead yourself. And most people have never done the work. I so the book came out, and I won't tell you where, but a major state in the United States, they have the head of leadership development there brought in all of their chiefs, so 40 different
Right.
agencies for the state, and they said, we want you to come in and talk about well-being, but what we really want you to do is to take them through know thyself and know thy values. And
Right.
I'd never done it before. I mean, I've done it for myself, right? But you want to see a powerful experience. Ask people, because I had a very difficult upbringing and then got kicked out of the house when I was 18 after my father had pretty much destroyed my self esteem and had no money and no support and had to go figure out how to make a life. And, it's interesting because people come up to me when I speak and I tell the story and they're like, that happened to me like that. I just want you to know. I know, but it's very common. None of us had a great. I mean, I just was talking to somebody yesterday. I go, tell me about your childhood. I had a great childhood. I'm like, okay, you're a lucky
God
man.
bless.
Yeah, exactly. Because most people didn't. But the thing is that the deaths in the family, the a difficult situation between brother and sister, or like amongst your siblings, parents who drank too much, out of work, having to move. These are all little mini traumas,
Yeah.
and
And maybe not
they
so many, you know what I mean?
but they're
And
but
maybe not so many.
they're still driving the boat. As
Yeah.
Wayne Dyer said, don't let the wake drive the boat. But they are for
Hmm.
most of us because we're not aware that these experiences influenced us. And by the way, there's a phenomenal book called, which has been in the New York Times top 10 for the last like 4 or 5 years, called The Body Keeps Score. And what it
Mm,
says is that these traumas live in your body, and that you've got to bring them to the surface and heal them
right.
if you don't want them to continue. So this is like real science around this. But I'll give you an example. So my father was massive. I mean, painfully, brutally critical of me. No matter what I did, there was
The
no
way you
success that
describe it in the
was
book, like quite literally
ever
brought
good.
tears to my eyes. It's just amazing. Amazingly
And
terrible.
so what happened was, so I go into work and I'm highly motivated and I'm doing well, but I think I was like 50 years old before it dawned on me that what was driving my motivation was to go, see, look at this. I, became a vice president at 30. I became a senior vice president at 37. See, look what I did. And I'm like, so somebody said to me, they go, it helped you because look what you've done with your life. But
Mm,
it also was a perverse motivation. Like I think
yeah.
it was in you to work hard and perform. But when you're trying to prove to a ghost that, by the way, I didn't see him for 15 years and then he died, so it was like he's never in my life from the time I was 18 on. But this was the driving force of my life.
Right.
So the person who pointed it out to me, she goes, "Would you have been a better leader for people?" And it made me cry because what she was saying was, you probably took that out on your people. Like if you're pushing yourself that hard, then people are seeing that example. And I'm realizing there was one part of me that was thrilled by the success, but also never satisfied because it was over,
Same.
because I never got the love anytime that I was successful. So I wasn't going to
Right.
give it to myself.
Yeah.
So spending time, this is what we did in this exercise with this team in this one state. And I'm watching them and you could see like the emotion, like
Yep.
the same epiphany, but it wasn't mine, it wasn't my experience, it was theirs. And so if you can look at those things and say, and so for me, being highly motivated meant triumphing over the experience that I'd had, right?
Hmm.
but you get to a point where, like, do I need that strategy anymore? Like,
Mm,
that helped me when I was 18 and 20 and 22, but now that I'm 30, do I need that
right.
anymore? And I think that's really what this is, what we're talking about. So if you really want to be caring about your people, one of the other things is, my wife will tell you this. If she could come in here right now, she goes, "Tell you're going to tell them the truth." And I go, "No, I don't. I don't want them to know." But I remain to this day very self-critical. And my wife will go, "Do you realize how self-critical that is?" And it's unfortunately, I've done a lot of work to heal it, but it is the single worst thing you can do to yourself. And I
Okay.
read this book
I'm with you,
called
buddy. I'm with you.
"We All Are," right?
We'll
This
call
book.
this is not executive career chat. This is group therapy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like light some candles. I'm going to preach here, but there's a book called "Bird by Bird" by Anne Lamott. I'm sure some of your audiences read this, but I was reading it because I was my father's voice when I started to write my Lead from the Heart was telling me, "You're not an author. You don't have anything to say." So I'm
Right.
bringing his voice into my life, and it was It was crippling me, like it
Yeah.
was keeping me from doing it. So I read this book by Anne Lamott, and she's really talking about writing and how to think about writing. But
Hmm.
in the midst of it, she says, if you're going to be a writer, which was my goal in the moment, she goes, you need to be militantly on your own side, militantly on
Yeah.
your own side. And I was just like, oh my God, I've like wasted my life by being self-critical. But you have to love yourself. And you have to be forgiving of yourself and to
Yeah.
accept, who you are. That's not to say that you don't want to grow, but if you can accept yourself and aren't, harming yourself because, oh man, I made that mistake. Go out on a golf course and see all the people that just lose it because they hit a golf ball,
In the
not where
wrong
they
spot.
wanted
Yeah.
to. And you're like, that guy hasn't done his work. It's like, love yourself.
That is really, I think, as you start to, you know, go into executive leadership and to stay in it successfully, it's not, I mean, not that you don't need any external skill set trainings or anything anymore after that, but it really, after that, is really an inside job. Because if you're not, I find that in doing the work, you can then be more empathetic because you've given yourself grace, so then you can give
Yes.
others grace. And until you can give yourself grace, like you said, you're going to put every, you know, hang up that you have internally, you're going to put it on your people, even unconsciously, and
Yes.
it could be with good intention. It's not even sitting here, everybody's mean and trying to screw over their people, but like you inadvertently, like, I remember I have a trait of like, I don't want to surprise people. Well, every time I had a freaking idea, I was like putting it in Slack, and I did not know the after effect of that was everybody was dropping what they were doing and did my idea. And I was like causing chaos, not knowing it until someone told me. And I was like, oh, I don't want that. I thought everybody was just taking my ideas and cataloging them, and then we'll talk about it at a later date. Well, they didn't know to do that. They were just, okay, that's the next thing to do. And like I was overwhelming everybody. And so, like, again, good intentions, not meaning to be mean, but that in and of itself is a little toxic, even though it's not bad intentions, right? So, like,
I think the most toxic managers are the ones that know themselves the least because if they understood
they
themselves,
understand their ripple effect,
they would.
and they
They
don't.
would. It's their presence.
Yeah.
Somebody put up, and I don't think she was the original person that said this, but somebody put up in the chat the Maya Angelou. People, won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is my mantra. It's in the book because it's absolutely true. So, if you don't have the presence of mind to understand that who you are speaks more loudly than anything,
right,
right? So if that's the case, you're going to be motivated to do that work so that
right.
you, like, for example, people obviously picked up on me that guy is unrelenting with himself. Somewhere along the line, somebody figured that out. And so to work for me knew that was an expectation of them. If I'm going to expect
Hmm.
it of me, I might as well expect it of you. So I got
Right.
performance, but I probably burned some people out that I
Yeah,
regret. And so yeah, it's do that work. Just
it's
do the work.
important. And I know I have some people on the call that are not working, and this all sounds a little, idealistic sometimes when you're not working and you might be interviewing somewhere that is a little toxic or is a little head, strong in its leadership versus being balanced in head and heart. And, in the end, you got to work, right? So, like, nobody's going to say, don't interview in a way to get that job. But I talked to someone recently that they were like, now that I've done some of this work, I don't ever want to go back to that type of a toxic environment. And but yet at the same time, I got to work, right? And it's a tough market. Like we need to talk realistically. And I think the key to remember is once you've done this work, you know, you're not going to be that person who hadn't done the work again. You can't, it's like you rip the Band-Aid off. You can't go back to being un,
Right. You're never the
unworked on,
same.
right? So
Can't
like,
go in the
so
same river
now if you
twice.
have to go into a semi-toxic environment or a very headstrong person, because they exist, right? You know how to set boundaries. You know how to advocate for yourself. You know that you can conduct yourself in a heart, head driven manner versus just head driven only. And look, if you ultimately get fired for it, then it probably wasn't your people, right? Like in the end, because some of the questions were about how do you change this? And I'm like, you might not, so if you got to do what you got to do to get a job, that's no one will ever fault somebody for that. But being strong in who you are allows you to set boundaries in those types of climates if you find yourself in one despite your best efforts. And then you might not be able to change where you are and you have to look. And that's just life. Like that's not, you're never going
I,
to change a whole company if you're, but you have to emulate it from the bottom up is what you said earlier. And not that our people here on the bottom, but it's just you can only start with you. It's really the only thing you can do.
The interesting byproduct of this is that when you've done the work and you realize, okay, I've got strengths and I've got limitations. So not
Hmm.
only does that make you more empathetic, right? But it makes you more effective because you realize there are certain things that I'm not very good at. So I'm
Right.
going to find people who can do that for me.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like being able to say to somebody, I'm so glad I hired you, Lisa, because I don't have any of the talents that you have. I don't have those
Right.
skills. I've got other ones. And I'm so grateful because you add something to this team that I couldn't possibly bring myself. Who doesn't want to hear that? Who doesn't
Right.
want to,
Exactly.
right, to be acknowledged that way? But the other thing is that when you're working with somebody for a while and you start to look and realize that there's personality issues, we all have them, right? There's just things we all do that bug
Right.
people, right? You look away from those. You're like, that's okay. Like, it's not harming anyone what they're doing. They're always tapping a pencil in a meeting. It's like, okay, don't do that in the meeting, but I don't care if you're doing it on your own. It's a bad example, but you get the idea. It's like, let people be who they are and use the word grace. Not a word that I would have used a couple of years ago, but it really is that. And
It
people
really
know
is
it.
that.
So
Yeah.
I made a mistake and you allowed me to make the mistake without calling it out, but I know I made the mistake and you
Right.
did. I'm like, thank you for that. Because my motivation is to do good work. If I made a good mistake, it's like, you don't have to ring the bell or the buzzer and call it out.
Right.
Hey, everyone, look
Put
what
it on a
Lisa
front
did,
page.
right?
Right.
It's like giving people the space and the grace to be able to be that way. And I added the word emotional to this, but it's psychological and emotional leadership.
No,
So it's how people
it's
feel.
important. And it's funny, my buddy Dorothy Dalton, who if you guys don't know each other, you should probably meet. She's a coach in Europe and a recruiter in Europe, and she said it's also damaging sometimes to go back to those types of environments. And I think that's just it is, right? Because once you've healed, you don't necessarily want to go back to that, right? Per se. But if I think that's where, it's not a plug for what we do, but I think the key is being preventative and being proactive and like developing your network and talking to people before you know them and having conversations before you need it is key because then if you find yourself in that type of environment, you have options. You can leave, right? If you've, put in reserves and you have networks that you can talk to but when you don't do that work ahead of time, you do feel stuck and you feel like you got no other options but tolerate this. And how do I fix this? And you're putting yourself in situations that are almost impossible to win because it's going to be hard to change the headstrong person until they have their own epiphany. or the toxic person until they have their own bottom, right? Hit their own bottom. But so, just make sure you have options and keep doing this work because if you're doing the work, you will also attract the people who are also doing the work too,
100%. It's
So I
and it's
know
interesting. Go ahead.
we're at the 12:59 mark.
Oh, we are okay.
Krista put in, the links to your books, how to find you. I'm just so grateful that you said yes. This was really amazing. And, like I said, definitely, part executive career chat, part group therapy, because as soon as I said that, everybody's like 100%. So I know we struck on a few chords today. And I'm just really grateful that you did this with us. Thank you so much.
You did a wonderful job of promoting it, supporting it, and you're a very cool person. And I feel that. That's how I operate. It's all about feelings, and I
Yeah,
just see how you post on LinkedIn, and I can feel where you're coming from, and it's a very admirable, wonderful place. So thank you for doing this.
you bet. We will have the recording and send out to everybody. And thanks all for being here. Thank you, Mark, and thanks, Krista, for always keeping the wheels on the bus. All
Thank you, Krista.
right, take care.
Bye bye.